The Subcommittee on Africa, Global Health, Global Human Rights will come to order. I want to note that a quorum is present, and pursuant to the notice, we are holding a hearing highlighting elections in Africa. And I want to welcome all the members on both sides of the aisle to our first subcommittee hearing. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the subcommittee at any point, and all members will have 5 days to submit statements, extraneous material, and questions for the record, subject to the length limitation in the rules. To insert something into the record, please have your staff email the previously mentioned address or contact full committee staff. As a reminder to members, please keep your video function on at all times, even when you are not recognized by the chair. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves, and please remember to mute yourself after you finish speaking. Consistent with HRES 965 and the accompanying regulations, staff will only mute members and witnesses as appropriate when they are not under recognition to eliminate immediate noise. I will now recognize myself for opening remarks. This hearing comes in the aftermath of a contentious period of democracy in the US that elevated into an election period marred by the abuse of executive power, voter suppression tactics, misinformation about COVID-19, and even an attack on the Capitol in an attempt to delay the peaceful transfer of power. What happened in the US over the last year is similar to what US officials and international observers have said about many elections around the world, including Europe, Asia, Latin America, and Africa. What is different, of course, is that in the United States, our democracy is still strong, and even after a disruption, we were able to continue to the peaceful transfer of power. As we try to process and reconcile the US issues, we also recognize the need for a greater perspective on how to engage more meaningfully during election cycles with African partners who are in the process of building and strengthening their democracies while facing specific country challenges, including entrenched leadership, economic hardships, civil war, terrorism, humanitarian crisis, and now, of course, COVID-19. Our subject is Africa today. There are positive examples to report. There are free and fair elections and credible elections in many African countries, such as Cape Verde, Ghana, Botswana, South Africa, and most recently in Niger. So while we are here today to look at countries that struggle with free, fair, and credible elections, I would like our witnesses to elaborate on successful elections as well. This year, the continent is scheduled to hold 13 presidential or general elections. We are watching these elections closely to listen and learn about areas where we can assist in promoting democratic societies. Recognizing that elections are a snapshot in time, we can use their conduct, outcome, and post-election events as a measure of democratic strength. I believe democratic governance is a shared value between the United States and Africa, and Afrobarometer confirms this with its study findings that 7 out of 10 Africans aspire to live under democratic governance. Traditionally, US policy toward Africa has focused on development assistance, humanitarian aid, and crisis response. Without withdrawing that crucial support, we seek to expand our focus to mutually beneficial partnerships that build commercial relationships, generate resources to mitigate the impact of climate change, enhance the livelihoods of women, youth, and the disadvantaged, and strengthen efforts on peace and security. To effectively push the latter, we need credible leaders in Africa who are committed to democratic governance and know the importance of free, fair, transparent, and credible elections. We need to have a watchful eye on countries with armed conflicts as they prepare for upcoming elections, including Chad, Ethiopia, Libya, Niger, and Somalia, and their ability to hold free, fair, and credible elections given the military and political turmoil. We're particularly watchful of the fragility in the Horn of Africa, which is volatile and facing humanitarian crisis. Although Somalia postponed its election plan for February 8th, I agree with former US Ambassador to Somalia, David Yamamoto, that the election should go forward as soon as possible to prevent backlash and increase instability in the country and the region. Also in the Horn, Ethiopia has elections scheduled in June. The country is extremely fragile as it simultaneously manages first-time multi-party voting, conflict in the Tigray region, and a humanitarian crisis. Although I applauded the initial efforts of the country to advance democracy, I am increasingly concerned by arrests, internet blackouts, hate speech, and other undemocratic actions currently going on and responsible to the Tigray crisis, as I noted in HRes 1183. Given the connection with the region, South Sudan, Eritrea, and Djibouti will be affected by instability in Somalia or Ethiopia. I remain concerned about the situation, and I seek the advice of the witnesses on how best to contribute to the conduct of credible elections in these tense and complex situations. Finally, we must also be concerned about COVID-19. As in our own elections, we've seen other governments, including Tanzania, Guinea, and Uganda, use disinformation or COVID-19 mitigation as a means to suppress voting and voter turnout. On the positive side, Nigeria widely publicized its COVID-19 policy framework, increasing transparency for interested parties, while the Central Republic of Africa dedicated poll workers to enforce COVID-19 mitigation measures. Now that we know the spread of the disease can be mitigated through personal protection equipment, sanitizing, and social distancing, we must ensure governments don't use the pandemic as an excuse to allow discredited elections. Finally, my colleagues and I are interested in hearing recommendations from the witnesses regarding legislative fixes to strengthen democracies in Africa. I strongly believe now is the time to engage Africa through partnerships that create mutually beneficial outcomes. I believe the engagement has to be more thoughtful and innovative than previous approaches. I want to thank our witnesses for participating in this important hearing, and the committee is looking forward to hearing your recommendations on how to strengthen the electoral process and improve democracy across the region. I now recognize the ranking member for the purpose of making his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Bass, and for again holding a hearing on a very important topic, elections in Africa, which follows and builds upon our hearing in September of last year on democratic backsliding in Africa. I think all of us who have been engaged with Africa these past decades have been disturbed by the retreat of democracy through much of sub-Saharan Africa. At last year's hearing, I cited the annual report put out by the Economist Intelligence Unit, showing how democracy has been receding through 2019. This year's report is worse, with democracy now ebbing to its lowest point since 2006. Only Mauritius ranks in the full democracy category per the EIU, and even it has slipped somewhat. More than half the countries of sub-Saharan Africa are now designated as having, quote, authoritarian regimes. What I fear when we discuss the issue of African elections is that we are reverting back to the old one person, one vote, one time conundrum, which plagued Africa during its first dance of freedom post-colonial era. Look, for example, at two countries, Benin and Tanzania, who once were headed by presidents who were true Democrats, committed to the peaceful transition of power. I recall sitting down with President Abani Yali, bowing our heads in prayer during one of his visits to the United States. There was a leader who was committed to public service and the integrity of electoral democracy. When he willingly stepped down in 2016, Benin was becoming a democratic model for Africa. Sadly, since then, under Patrice Talon, democracy has simply atrophied. It has not just simply atrophied, it has regressed substantially. Ditto for Tanzania. President Kikwete was another Democrat who, after serving the allotted 2 terms per the Constitution, stepped down. His successor, John Magufuli, is cut from the very different cloth, winning re-election last year in a purported landslide that was marred by allegation of significant voter fraud. So I do fear we are returning to that one person, one vote, one time. And whereas the post-colonial era, beginning with Ghana's independence in 1957, was characterized by ideological competition with the Soviet Union, which overshadows a fealty to democratic ideals. Today, we again see outside actors subverting democracy and elections throughout Africa, most notably China. I also think we should look critically at how our shortcomings have contributed to this democratic deficit. We saw under President George W. Bush, whose PEPFAR initiative did so much to transform and save the lives of so many Africans, a cultural personal relationship with African leaders, such as President Kikwete, and thus a very one-on-one encouragement of the need to respect elections. This was replaced under both President Obama and President Trump with a certain aloofness towards Africa. One hopes that President Biden's past affinity for working with him for personal relationships and encouragement are important, and hopefully we can reignite those friendships. I hope that our witnesses, especially Mvemba Dizolele, who is an expert on the Democratic Republic of Congo, will address what I characterize as a debacle of a presidential election which took place in the DRC in 2018. In that election, it was quite obvious to independent observers that the declared winner, KCD, received less votes than Martin Fayulu. Yet because of the corrupt bargain between outgoing strongman Joseph Kabila, the Constitutional Court, which was handpicked by Kabila, declared the winner. Surprisingly and troubling, our State Department then issued a statement that said the United States welcomes the Congolese Constitutional Court certification of Tshisekedi as the next president of the Democratic Republic of Congo, who was apparently driven by a handful of diplomats, including our ambassador, against an interagency consensus view. Specifically, I'd like to hear your appraisal of the State Department's welcoming message and how the message it sent was received in the region. I would also like to close on a positive note, however, and focus on a place where electoral democracy appears to be advancing, and that would be Somaliland region of Somalia. Despite lacking official recognition, Somaliland is a de facto autonomous and self-governing unit. It has scheduled parliamentary and local elections for May 31st of this year, following a transparent and inclusive voter registration between 2020 and January 2021, per statement issued by Denmark, the European Union, Finland, France, Germany, Italy, Ireland, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, the UK, and the United States. The election between the governing unity development of the Kulmiye party and two opposition parties, Justice and Welfare included, looks like it will be robustly contested. Other important aspect is it looks like partisan affiliation is transcending clan affiliation in that region. Unfortunately, it does not look like our government is providing any financial support to the election process, unlike the EU, the UK, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Taiwan. And perhaps witnesses from NDI and IRI can clarify whether they will be sending election observers to Somaliland. It is my hope that Somaliland can point the way back to electoral democracy, one person, one vote, but not just one time. Madam Chair, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ranking Member. And now I would like to introduce our witnesses. And let me just say to our witnesses, you have turned in your comments in full, and I would like to ask that you summarize your statements in 5 minutes, and you will notice on the screen a clock for 5 minutes. And so I will hit the gavel at about 30 seconds and ask you to wrap up. We want to do this to make sure that everybody on the committee has an opportunity to ask their questions. We know we have an impending vote that is, the guesstimate is 11:45, and I am going to recommend that we continue this hearing through the vote process, and that we all take turns in our groups and vote, and then please come back. We won't be able to recess the hearing since our vote series take so long. So our first witness is Dr. Aloysius Ordu, a senior fellow and director of the Africa Growth Initiative in the Global Economy and Development Program. He was previously vice president at the African Development Bank. Before his appointment as vice president, he worked at the World Bank for over 22 years and served in various leadership and managerial capacities. He is a member of the board of directors of the Partnership for Transparency Fund, a Washington, D.C. based nonprofit entity that builds capacity of civil society organizations to fight corruption, and holds a Ph.D. in economics from the Sussex University. Our second witness is Aude Darnal, an associate director at the Atlantic Council's New American Engagement Initiative, where her work focuses on the critical analysis and understanding of armed conflicts and of the humanitarian development peace nexus, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. She has experience in strategic communication and project management thanks to her work in NGOs, think tanks, and international organizations in Senegal and in the US. Ms. Darnal holds a Master's of Science in Conflict Studies from the London School of Economics and Political Science and a BA in International Relations and International Law from the University of Quebec in Montreal. Mr. Dickson Omondi is Regional Director for the Southern and East Africa at the NDI, National Democratic Institute. He has over 20 years of experience in political party strengthening, legislative development, advancing electoral integrity, and civil society development work. He is a board member of the Carolina for Kibera, an international NGO that works to catalyze positive change through healthcare, education, and girl empowerment in Kenya. He graduated with a Bachelor of Laws degree from the University of Nairobi and is a member of the International Commission of Jurists, Kenya chapter. Mr. Mvemba Dizolele is a senior advisor for Africa at the International Republican Institute. Formerly, he was a distinguished visiting fellow and national fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution on War, Revolution, and Peace. He was a grantee of the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting and covered the 2006 election in the DRC, where he was embedded with the UN Peacekeepers District and South Kivu Province as a reporter. I would now like to ask our first witness to provide testimony in 5 minutes. Dr. Ordu.
Chairman Bass, Ranking Member Smith, honorable members of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, and distinguished members of the Subcommittee, thank you very much for the opportunity to address election integrity in Africa. At the Brookings Institution, as many of you may know, we dedicate a chapter annually to our flagship report, and that report is the Foresight Africa. And we dedicate that chapter to democracy and good governance. We just launched this year's last month. These underpin achievements in economic growth and human development. I'm very encouraged that the US takes a closer look at elections and governance in Africa. First, do permit me to share with you some winds of change exemplifying a newfound solidarity on the African continent. At a time when globalization is under threat, African nations have been intentional in pursuing collaboration. This newfound solidarity is different from anything we've known before. Take, for example, the 2017 establishment of the Africa CDC, and of course, the African Continental Free Trade Area launched in January this year. These efforts are manifestations of Africa's long-held aspirations articulated in the AU's Agenda 2063. The building blocks of the African Continental Free Trade Areas are 8 regional communities, and these communities with the AU apply Africa's solutions to Africa's problems. They support peacekeeping, they mediate in election disputes, and they send observers to monitor elections. ECOWAS, for example, in West Africa, we all know, participated actively in Ghana in 2008, in Guinea 2010, and Liberia in 2011. Despite this success, regional economic communities remain limited in the arena. So what is the state of Africa's elections today? Progress might seem limited if we judge these elections through the prisms of the Western world, because history tells us, as Chairwoman Bass mentioned, that Africa has become more democratic if we take a 30-year time horizon. Why do I say that? The days of coups and counter-coups have gone. Most leaders have left office peacefully. Multi-party elections have become the norm. Are these perfect? Not yet, but there is momentum. Opposition parties are making progress. Politics is becoming more competitive. More women than ever before are winning electoral offices. 1 in 4 congresspersons in Africa is a woman. And in some countries, the ratio is higher. And very, very interestingly, youths are becoming more politically active on the African continent. And this augurs well because, as we all know, a majority of Africans are under the age of 25. that democracy remains a work in progress at best on the African continent. Why do I say that? There are huge entry barriers to run for electoral office in the African continent. Here in the US, a congresswoman, a congressman is assessed by the laws they pass. On the African continent, we're not quite there yet, because different yardsticks are used to assess success. Did the congressman or woman pay my family's tuition fees? Did they help with healthcare expenses, funeral and wedding? These are the sort of things we use to measure their success. Did they, as we say in Nigeria, provide stomach infrastructure, which is another name for food? Did they build roads in our communities, clinics, schools, etc.? So these are some of the things that make it much more difficult. Why is this happening? Answer is weak administrative capability of the state, ineffective institutions for service delivery, and yes, bribery and corruption. And as Congresswoman mentioned earlier, Chairman Bass mentioned earlier, third termism is becoming worrisome. This is the process whereby some form of constitutional coup, if you like, 15 of the 16 attempts in between the period 2015-2021 succeeded. So enter the pandemics. COVID-19 set the world back, and it particularly set Africa back. Here's how it impacted. 14 countries postponed elections, as we also heard from Ranking Member Smith. Some manipulated the election schedules, Uganda. Some dismissed the virus as fake news, we heard, Tanzania. Some reduced campaigning and voter turnout. Many observers stayed away, as was just said. And of course, opposition voters, already wary of results, boycotted the elections. So what are the implications for the US-Africa relations? First of all, as we all know, expectations are high in Africa that the Biden-Harris administration will usher in a new dispensation, and that seems to be borne out as things are. And Africans continue to see the US as the most powerful country on earth.
Dr. Aude,
Yes.
you have an opportunity to continue during Q&A. You can continue to make your points, but I'd like to move on to our next witness, Mr. Darnal.
Thank you very much.
Chairwoman Bass, Ranking Member Smith, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. Before I begin, I would like to state for the record that the views expressed in this testimony are my own and do not represent the official position of the Attorney Council. The United States has been engaged on the continent to support African countries' economic and human development and to tackle security challenges amid both democratic progress and backsliding. Particular focus has been paid to unstable regions as part of the American security and counterterrorism strategy. Yet, greater and sustained attention should also be given to more stable parts of the continent beyond the sole security lens. That is why I will focus my testimony on my experience working in Guinea from 2018 to 2019 during the onset of the 2020 electoral crisis. Guinea held parliamentary elections after a 2-year delay, a presidential election, and a constitutional referendum in 2020. The presidential party won the majority of the parliament seats. A new constitution that allowed President Condé to run again was passed, and subsequently, he was re-elected for a third term. All 3 elections were marred by irregularities, disinformation, voter suppression, abuse of violence, and coercion by security forces. Violence also erupted between communities which are particularly polarized along political lines. My time in Guinea enabled elections in order to have sustainable and positive results. In that sense, continuing support by the United States and the international community to fail elections and authoritarian leaders raises concerns about outside parties' real interests. Fourth and finally, the United States should support regional cooperation. This means advancing the development and impact of regional organizations such as ECOWAS and the African Union, whose role in promoting elections is critical. It is also true for intra-Africa cooperation and diplomacy. Promoting African solutions for the continent will increase the likelihood that they will be accepted at the national and local level. These are only a few of the many challenges impeding elections and democracy on the continent, but I hope this testimony will bring them to the forefront of the debate. Thank you again, Chairwoman Bass, Ranking Member Smith, and members of the subcommittee for inviting me to testify before you today. It was a great honor and pleasure. I'm looking forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Omondi.
Chairman Bass, Ranking Member Smith, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the invitation to speak on the important topic of elections in Africa. And I also really want to thank you for the work you're doing in promoting democracy, health, and dignity in Africa. Madam Chair, I really want to thank you for the work you're doing in international election observation. I had the privilege to work with and see you in action when you led NDI's delegation to the 2017 Kenya elections. Ranking Member Smith, I want to thank you for your support for democracy and your support for the work of NDI and IRI. Madam Chair, last year was exceptionally difficult for elections in Africa. The COVID-19 pandemic increased the challenges facing elections in Africa. Incumbents used public health safeguards to tighten their grip in power by limiting political competition. Democratically inclined government, on the other hand, Madam Chair, struggled to balance public health safeguards against the right to vote. Election observers were confronted with new realities, including restrictions on the ability to directly observe electoral activities. Thanks to the support we've received from the National Endowment for Democracy, USAID, and State Department, NDI was quickly able to pivot its electoral integrity assistance in Africa to respond to these constraints, particularly, Madam Chair, by adopting virtual techniques to support citizen election observer groups and to conduct international election assessment activities. These techniques were relevant and effective in multiple contexts, including in Ghana 2020, where, Madam Chair, you had the privilege of speaking in one of the roundtables we organized. Madam Chair, I was also asked to speak on the recent Uganda and upcoming elections in Ethiopia and Somalia. The election in Ethiopia, Madam Chair, will take place in a very challenging context, given COVID-19 and the prevailing concerns around security and politics in Ethiopia. Ethiopia and Friends of Ethiopia, Madam Chair, will need to work intensively to address the humanitarian needs, the security challenges, and the concerns about human rights violations across the country, and particularly in Tigray. Madam Chair, I believe that the election in Ethiopia is important, but it is but one in the many actions that will be needed to steady the political transition in the country. Madam Chair, the recent elections in Uganda was characterized by significant limitations on political and civic space. The level of violence against the main opposition candidate and his supporters was unprecedented. Freedom of information was curtailed. The level to, Madam Chair, was simply not fair and conducive to a credible election process. Unfortunately, that represents a disturbing trend we've seen in recent elections. Madam Chair, the lack of political agreement to find a way forward for the Somalia election presents a significant challenge for peace and security in the country and, as you've said, in the broader Horn of Africa. While it is incumbent upon Somalis to find consensus and forge a way forward, it is also incumbent upon the international community to continue working with them to find agreement and to guarantee any agreement that might come as a result. Madam Chair, the election in Somalia will be very important to keep Somalia on its path of post-conflict reconstruction. Despite these many challenges, Madam Chair, as you noted, there are many positive examples, including from recent elections in Ghana, Malawi, and Niger. Africa's better educated and more politically engaged youth a growing judiciary and independence in the judiciary, the resilience we see in civil society, and as you mentioned, the abiding faith that Africans continue to have in democracy, all point to the possibilities of progress in Africa. Madam Chair, as I conclude, I would therefore like to recommend continued international partnerships to strengthen Africa's democratic institutions, to invest in Africa's civil society, especially women and youth, to continue support as you've done for international election observation activities, to support ongoing democratic transitions, and finally, to counter authoritarian rule and illiberal influences by China, Russia, and other regimes that aggressively seek to undermine democratic foundations in Africa. I thank you, Ranking Member Smith, and all members of the Distinguished Subcommittee for the important work you are doing. As always, we stand ready to provide you with insights and on-the-ground reports to assist in your work. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And our final witness, Mr. Dizolele. You're muted. You're muted right now.
There we go. Thank you very much. Chairwoman Bass, Ranking Member Smith, members of the committee, thank you for holding this timely and important hearing. And thank you for the opportunity to testify. It is a pleasure and an honor to be back before this committee and talk about development in Africa. By way of background, the International Republican Institute, IRI, is a non-profit, non-partisan organization working in more than 60 countries around the world. We are part of the National Endowment for Democracy family, along with our sister organizations, the National Democratic Institute, the Center for International Private Enterprise, and the Solidarity Center. Our Africa team works in over 20 countries, including the Gambia,